In the spring of 1453, the fate of an ancient world was decided behind the massive stone walls of Constantinople. For more than 1,000 years, the city had withstood sieges, invasions, and the slow erosion of imperial power. Yet now, a young Ottoman ruler, barely 21 years old, stood before its gates with an army shaped by gunpowder, ambition, and a vision of empire. What followed was not merely a military conquest, but a turning point that closed the medieval age and reshaped the balance of power between East and West. To understand the fall of Constantinople is to understand how empires rise, adapt, and redefine history itself. The road to 1453, political context, preparations, and strategic calculations. By the mid-15th century, Constantinople stood as a relic of a once dominant empire, surrounded on all sides by Ottoman territory. The Byzantine Empire, which had ruled the eastern Mediterranean for centuries, had been reduced to little more than the city itself and a handful of outlying lands. Internally weakened by political fragmentation, economic decline, and long-standing civil conflicts, Byzantium survived largely through diplomacy, strategic marriages, and appeals to Western Christendom for support. However, these appeals produced little more than symbolic assistance, as Western Europe remained divided by its own rivalries and cautious of committing resources to a city many believed was already lost. In contrast, the Ottoman state had emerged from the crisis of the early 15th century stronger and more centralized than before. The restoration of authority under Mehmed I and the consolidation policies of Murad II laid the institutional foundations of a durable empire. By the time Mehmed II ascended the throne in 1451, the Ottomans possessed a disciplined standing army, an effective administrative system, and control over key trade routes connecting Anatolia and the Balkans. For Mehmed II, Constantinople was not merely a symbolic prize, it was a strategic necessity. As long as the city remained outside Ottoman control, it divided Ottoman lands in Europe from those in Asia and served as a potential foothold for foreign intervention. Mehmed II approached the problem of Constantinople with careful calculation rather than impulsive aggression. He understood that previous Ottoman attempts had failed not because of a lack of strength, but because of insufficient preparation and unfavorable diplomatic conditions. One of his first actions was to neutralize potential threats on multiple fronts. Treaties were concluded with Hungary, Venice, and other regional powers, ensuring that the Ottomans could concentrate their military resources on a single objective. This diplomatic isolation of Byzantium was as crucial as any battlefield maneuver, leaving the city without the prospect of meaningful external relief. Military preparation proceeded with equal attention to detail. Recognizing the formidable defensive capabilities of the Theodosian walls, Mehmed invested heavily in artillery, a relatively new but rapidly evolving technology. The casting of massive cannons, including the famous large-bore bombard engineered by the Hungarian founder Urban, signaled a fundamental shift in siege warfare. These weapons were designed not only to intimidate, but to systematically break defenses that had resisted assault for centuries. At the same time, the Ottoman army was reorganized to support prolonged siege operations, combining elite infantry units, auxiliary forces, and logistical networks capable of sustaining months of combat. Naval strategy formed another essential component of Mehmed's plan. Although the Ottoman navy had historically been secondary to its land forces, control of the surrounding seas was indispensable for isolating Constantinople. Shipyards were expanded, new vessels were constructed, and experienced sailors were recruited from across the empire. The objective was not necessarily to defeat Western fleets in open battle, but to prevent supplies and reinforcements from reaching the city by sea. In this context, maritime blockade was conceived as an extension of land warfare, reinforcing the siege from all directions. Perhaps the most decisive preparatory measure was the construction of Rum-Eli Hizari on the European shore of the Bosphorus. Erected in remarkable speed in 1452, the fortress directly faced Anadolu Hizari on the opposite bank, allowing the Ottomans to control maritime traffic through the strait. This effectively severed Constantinople's northern supply lines and demonstrated Mehmed's determination to eliminate every strategic vulnerability. The fortress was both a military instrument and a political statement, signaling that the final confrontation was no longer a matter of speculation, but of timing. By the eve of the siege, the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. Byzantium possessed strong walls and a tradition of resilience, but lacked manpower, resources, and reliable allies. The Ottoman state, by contrast, combined centralized authority, technological innovation, and strategic foresight. The road to 1453 was therefore not defined by a single decision or battle, but by a convergence of political calculation, military modernization, and strategic patience. When the siege began, the outcome was not predetermined, but the conditions had been shaped with such precision that the fall of Constantinople became not an accident of history, but the result of deliberate imperial design. The Siege of Constantinople, Warfare, Tactics, and the Fall of the City. The Siege of Constantinople in 1453 was the culmination of a carefully orchestrated military campaign, in which traditional forms of warfare collided with emerging technologies and new strategic thinking. When Ottoman forces arrived before the city's walls in early April, they faced one of the most formidable defensive systems in the medieval world. The Theodosian walls, a complex of multiple layers of stone fortifications, towers, and moats, had protected Constantinople for nearly 1,000 years. Yet this time, the defenders confronted an enemy whose approach to siege warfare reflected a profound transformation in military practice. Mehmed II deployed his army with deliberate precision. Ottoman forces encircled the land walls from the Golden Horn to the Sea of Marmara, preventing movement in or out of the city. Artillery was positioned at critical points opposite the weakest sections of the fortifications, particularly along the central land walls. The cannons, some of unprecedented size, were fired continuously in an effort to weaken stonework through sustained bombardment. Although these weapons were slow to reload and prone to damage, their psychological and physical impact marked a decisive break from earlier siege methods that relied primarily on ladders, rams, and mining. Inside Constantinople, Emperor Constantine XI oversaw a defense that relied on discipline, experience, and the strategic use of limited resources. The city's defenders were a small and diverse force composed of Byzantine soldiers, Genoese mercenaries, and volunteers from other parts of Europe. Giovanni Giustiniani, an experienced Genoese commander, played a central role in organizing the defense of the land walls. Repairs were carried out nightly as breaches caused by artillery were filled with earth, rubble, and timber, demonstrating the defenders' resilience and adaptability in the face of sustained attack. Naval warfare proved equally significant. The Byzantines had stretched a massive chain across the entrance to the Golden Horn, preventing Ottoman ships from entering the harbor and protecting the northern walls from direct assault. This obstacle initially frustrated Mehmed's naval strategy, as Ottoman vessels were unable to bypass the barrier through conventional means. In response, the Ottomans executed one of the most innovative maneuvers of the siege, the transportation of ships overland. By constructing a greased wooden track across the hills of Galata, Ottoman forces moved dozens of ships into the Golden Horn, effectively outflanking the city's defenses. This maneuver not only undermined Byzantine naval security but also delivered a severe psychological blow to the defenders. As the siege progressed, both sides engaged in constant tactical adaptation. Ottoman forces attempted mining operations beneath the walls, seeking to collapse sections from below, while Byzantine engineers countered with tunnels and explosives of their own. Skirmishes, night raids, and limited assaults tested the endurance of the defenders, who faced mounting exhaustion and dwindling supplies. Despite moments of success, the Byzantines lacked the manpower to sustain prolonged resistance, and hopes for substantial Western relief gradually faded. The final phase of the siege unfolded in late May. Mehmed II ordered a massive, coordinated assault designed to overwhelm the defenders through sheer pressure and attrition. Waves of auxiliary troops were sent forward first, exhausting the defenders and identifying weak points. They were followed by more disciplined regular forces, and finally by elite Janissary units. During this decisive assault, Giustiniani was severely wounded and withdrew from the walls, an event that critically weakened the morale and cohesion of the defense. Shortly thereafter, Ottoman troops penetrated the walls near the gate of St. Romanus. On May 29, 1453, Ottoman forces entered Constantinople, bringing an end to Byzantine rule that had lasted for over 11 centuries. Emperor Constantine XI is believed to have died in the fighting, symbolizing the final collapse of imperial authority. The fall of the city was not merely the result of overwhelming numbers, but of coordinated strategy, technological innovation, and relentless pressure. The Siege of Constantinople thus stands as a defining moment in military history, illustrating the transition from medieval to early modern warfare and marking the irreversible end of one empire and the rise of another. Aftermath and historical significance. From medieval capital to imperial metropolis. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 marked far more than the capture of a fortified city. It represented a profound transformation in political authority, urban identity, and world history. With the entry of Mehmed II into the city, Constantinople ceased to be the symbolic heart of a fading medieval empire and began its reinvention as the imperial capital of a rising Ottoman state. This transition was not instantaneous, but it was deliberate, structured, and deeply consequential for both the region and the wider world. In the immediate aftermath of the conquest, Mehmed II moved swiftly to assert order and legitimacy. The city, exhausted by siege and depopulated by centuries of decline, required stability as much as military control. Mehmed declared Constantinople the new capital of the Ottoman Empire and adopted the title Kaisar-i Rum, Caesar of Rome, positioning himself as the lawful successor to Roman imperial authority. This claim was not merely symbolic. It framed the Ottoman state as an inheritor of universal sovereignty rather than a regional power, reshaping how the empire perceived itself and how it wished to be perceived by others. Urban reconstruction became a central priority. Large-scale settlement policies were implemented to repopulate the city, drawing Muslims, Christians, and Jews from across Ottoman territories. Religious institutions were reorganized under a system that allowed non-Muslim communities a degree of autonomy, ensuring continuity of social and economic life. The conversion of Hagia Sophia into a mosque symbolized the new political reality, yet many churches remained active, reflecting a pragmatic approach to governance. Constantinople, now increasingly known as Istanbul, began to function as a multi-ethnic, multi-religious metropolis at the core of an expanding empire. The conquest also carried immense geopolitical consequences. With Constantinople under Ottoman control, the balance of power in the eastern Mediterranean shifted decisively. The Ottomans secured dominance over key land and sea routes linking Europe and Asia, strengthening their position in regional and international trade. European states, particularly Venice and Genoa, were forced to renegotiate their commercial relationships with the empire, while others began searching for alternative routes to the east. In this sense, the fall of Constantinople indirectly contributed to the age of maritime exploration that reshaped global history. Culturally and intellectually, the conquest marked the end of the Byzantine world as a political entity, but not the disappearance of its legacy. Greek scholars, manuscripts, and intellectual traditions migrated westward, contributing to the development of Renaissance humanism. At the same time, Ottoman rulers selectively incorporated Byzantine administrative practices, architectural forms, and imperial symbolism into their own system. The city became a space of synthesis, where classical heritage and Islamic governance intersected in new and lasting ways. From a broader historical perspective, the transformation of Constantinople into an imperial Ottoman capital symbolized the closing of the medieval era and the emergence of early modern empires defined by centralized authority, gunpowder warfare, and global ambition. The city's fall did not signify simple destruction, but rather continuity through transformation. As Istanbul, it would stand for centuries as one of the world's great imperial capitals, embodying the shift from medieval fragmentation to imperial consolidation and marking one of the most decisive turning points in world history.